Hello, friends of the channel. This is a story where an artist discovers that his paintings influence real-world events, which leads him to find ways to manipulate the outcomes of elections, sports tournaments, weather events, and many other activities. Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. The Art of Creating a New World. Arthur's studio was a graveyard of half-finished dreams until the day he painted the sky on fire. He was a man of quiet desperation, living in a walk-up in a city that didn't care for his name. One Tuesday, frustrated by a mounting pile of past-due notices, he threw a glob of crimson and gold onto a canvas, depicting a freak lightning strike hitting the power transformer outside his window. 10 minutes later, the sky turned a bruised purple. A bolt of jagged white light tore through the air, and his neighborhood plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. It was a coincidence, he told himself. Then he painted a stray cat, finding a bag of gourmet scraps. An hour later, he saw the tabby across the street, feasting on a discarded ribeye. The realization didn't come with a choir of angels, but with a cold, sharpening clarity. Arthur wasn't just an observer of life, he was its architect. He started small. A painting of a local underdog winning a city council seat led to an overnight scandal for the incumbent. He moved to the stock market, rendering a meticulously detailed mural of a failing tech startup's headquarters bathed in a golden, divine light. By the time the paint dried, a massive, unannounced government contract was leaked, and Arthur's modest shares turned into a fortune. But Arthur was a man of grander visions. He moved from a cramped studio to a high-security penthouse where the walls were covered in the finest linen canvases. He began to treat the world like his personal gallery. He painted the Super Bowl, a surrealist piece where the quarterback's arm turned into a literal cannon, and watched as the most improbable comeback in sports. History unfolded exactly as he had brushed it. He moved into the arena of global power. He sat before a 6-foot canvas for 3 days, painting a peace treaty in the Middle East. He used soft pastels and gentle strokes, and within a week, leaders who hadn't spoken in decades were shaking hands on the evening news, their faces mirroring the exact expressions of relief Arthur had captured in oil. He was a god in a stained smock. The influence became an addiction. He manipulated the weather, painting rain over drought-stricken nations and clear skies for royal weddings. He steered the global economy with a flick of his wrist, devaluing currencies to punish rivals and inflating the wealth of those who caught his whim. He was the invisible hand, the shadow puppeteer. Governments began to notice the pattern, the artistic anomaly. They couldn't explain how a recluse in a penthouse predicted every geopolitical shift, but they knew the paintings held the key. Arthur grew arrogant. He stopped painting reality as it was and started painting it as he felt it should be, regardless of the cost. To settle a grudge against a rival who once snubbed him, he painted a localized hurricane that decimated a specific coastal resort. The thrill of destruction felt as potent as the thrill of creation. He began to manipulate wars, painting the tactical errors of generals and the miraculous survival of chosen platoons. He was no longer an artist. He was a warlord of the canvas. His greatest masterpiece was meant to be his coronation. He began a massive triptych titled The New Order. It was a vision of a world united under a single benevolent authority. He painted himself not as a man, but as a figure of light, surrounded by the world's leaders in a state of perpetual gratitude. He worked with a feverish intensity, using paints mixed with rare minerals and his own blood to ensure the binding of the reality. But as he approached the final strokes, the world outside began to fray. You cannot rewrite the laws of physics and human nature indefinitely without creating ink bleeds in reality. The weather patterns he'd manipulated began to clash. The economies he'd inflated began to collapse under the weight of their own artificiality. The people he had painted into peace grew restless, sensing the lack of agency in their own lives. The devastating event didn't come from a rival or a government strike. It came from the canvas itself. As Arthur leaned in to paint the final detail, his own crown, a drop of black paint fell from his brush. It didn't hit the canvas. It hung in midair. Then the canvas began to drink. The oil colors didn't dry. They began to ripple like water. The image of the new order started to liquefy and run down the fabric. Arthur tried to grab a palette knife to scrape the error away, but the knife passed through the canvas as if it were smoke. The reality he had built began to unspool at the seams. Outside his window, the sky didn't turn a color he had chosen. It turned a color that didn't exist, a void like static. The buildings below began to smear like wet watercolor. The artist's paradox had triggered. By trying to paint himself as the ultimate authority over life, he had accidentally painted the end of the medium itself. The world was folding in on the studio. He saw the world leaders he had controlled turning into faceless smears of gray. He heard the roar of 1,000 conflicting storms he had summoned all at once. In a panic, Arthur tried to paint a reset. He grabbed a fresh canvas, but every stroke he made turned to dust before it touched the surface. He was a creator who had lost his voice. The penthouse began to dissolve into white light. The last thing Arthur saw was his own hands. The hands that had shaped the fate of billions, turning into translucent strokes of charcoal, fading into the great, unpainted nothingness of a world that refused to be framed any longer. The masterpiece was gone, and the artist was merely a smudge on the floor of eternity.